I'm Barbara Amstutz, President of the Central Delaware County League of Women Voters. It is my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to the Candidate Forum for the Pennsylvania House District 168 with Christopher Quinn and Kristin Seale. This event is sponsored by the League of Women Voters, the NAACP, and the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan civic organization. We do not tell you who or what party to vote for or who to support, but we want you to know about the issues facing your community, the ways each issue can be addressed, and provide you the resources to help you make informed, thoughtful choices. The mission of the League is to encourage knowledgeable and active participation in government, to increase the understanding of major public policy issues, and to influence public policy through education and advocacy. In this light, we encourage your active citizen engagement, impress on you the importance of voting on November 6th, and provide an opportunity today for a better understanding of the issues and candidates in this election. In the spirit of nonpartisanship, we request your compliance with the League's standards of conduct for debates. Please turn off your cell phones. No cameras, please. No applause during the event. No signs in the room. No campaign shirts. No political flyers or handouts. Be respectful of others in speech and behavior. This forum is being professionally videotaped. However, please no filming or use of any video from this event in partisan advertising. Rosalie Spellman will serve as our moderator. She will review the debate format, the procedure for questions received from the audience via cards, the role of the timekeeper, the timing of the candidate responses and rebuttals. It is my pleasure now to introduce our moderator, Rosalie Spellman.
As the president of the League just said, my name is Rosalie Spellman. I'm a member of the League, but not, of course, from the 168 House District. If you could again, I'm going to repeat Barbara's rules. If you could please check your cell phones to make sure that they're turned off. We have a lot of ground to cover. There are a lot of people here today, and there are many questions. Secondly, no applause. Applause will slow down the process. We're going to try to cover 16 questions, and that has been timed exactly to an hour. So please, no applause, no comments from the audience. Third, I want to remind you that this is not a debate. The League has very carefully, for many years, almost 100 years, since 1920, capitalized on their goal of spreading information. There's no win or lose here today. Your side doesn't win, the other side doesn't lose. This is a sharing of ideas. Please remember that in the way that you behave, and the candidates, so I also ask you to remember that as well. The format of this forum today is the same as it is for League forums all across the country. And that format is that questions have been submitted from the audience and vetted already. There may be, sometimes you come to these events and there are not enough questions, but I can tell you honestly, I've got 16 questions here already. The two candidates in alphabetical order are Ms. Kristin Seale and Mr. Chris Quinn. During the forum, I'm going to address each as Ms. and Mr. out of respect. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to make an opening statement. And I should tell you that the candidates met earlier in order to become acquainted with this format and also to decide who went first. Today, Mr. Seale is going to do his opening statement first. Yeah, no. That's a challenge, sorry. Ms. Seale. Maybe I should revert to Kristin and Chris. Okay. And in fact, I will, if you don't mind. So I've already spread respect, so please accept it. All right. All right, so Kristin and Chris. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to make an opening statement. And then Chris will begin. Then Ms. Seale, and what will happen is for the 16 questions, they'll go in a rotation. This has already been planned. There's 1.5 minutes for the opening statement, and then 1 minute for each candidate to respond to questions put to them by the audience. There are league members in the front row, and the league members will hold up a yellow card when there's 15 seconds more to your time. A red card means to stop, but you can finish a sentence. But also, you can use I've got the feeling that this mic is very in and out, and I apologize for that. But the candidates have a chance to use bonus cards. So if they want to elaborate on an answer, they can pull out their bonus card. They're given 30 seconds more to answer, and then it goes into the basket. If the bonus cards are used, that'll mean that there are 15 questions addressed rather than 16. And then the questions, as I said, I'm surprised I had a spiel on how you can submit more questions, but I'll skip that. No filming, of course your cell phones are turned off, and no applause. And with that, let's start with Chris. Your opening statement.
Well, first I want to say thank you for everyone for coming out tonight. I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters, to the NAACP, and the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce for holding this event. I'm a local resident. I grew up here in Middletown Township. I own a small business here in Delaware County. When I bought my first home here in Delaware County, I decided it was important to get involved. And one of the first things that I personally did, if you have any kids that play soccer, there's a 22-acre tract of land over called Slayton Park today that I began. And that was really my entree into getting involved in local civics. From there, I went and served on the Middletown Township Council for about 10 years. After that, I was asked to run for state representative, which I've been a representative for this area for about 2 years at this point. But that's not where my civic involvement stops. I also serve on the Delaware County Industrial Development Board, which helps fund capital improvement projects in our area. And I'm also a founding board member of an organization called Lifetime Wells International. And via that organization, I've traveled to Ghana, Africa, where we drill and mechanize well systems. I'm getting my card, so I can't keep going, but maybe I can finish up some more of this later. Thank you.
Kristin?
Thank you. I'm Kristin Seale, and I'm proud to be my party's nominee for the 168th House District this year. I am a lifelong public servant, and I am running because my family, my friends, and many people that I love in this community have rights that are under attack every day and fear for their public safety as well as their private property rights. I was raised by a hardworking single mother who taught me that if we had enough to eat and a roof over our heads, it was our duty to serve our community. So since childhood, I've volunteered with my mother, and I took that into my professional life as well. I'm proud to have held 2 union cards and to have worked serving labor unions in Washington, D.C. as a camerawoman. I'm proud to have also held a union card working at the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty, working together to organize a union with some of the staff attorneys that were protecting the most vulnerable people in one of our poorest states in this country. And I'm proud to have worked for the last decade on public policy in both the New Mexico State Legislature as well as the Pennsylvania Legislature. I worked on women's health policy, poverty law, and now I work on energy efficiency policy in our state. And I'm proud to serve on your Rose Tree Media School Board. I would be equally proud to serve this community as state representative. Thank you.
The first question is, would you support increased health and safety regulations for pipe development in Middletown? Kristin, you're first.
Absolutely. As a proud former cardholder in 2 labor unions, it is not my interest to reduce the amount of qualified labor that work on pipelines in that industry in our state. I think we could use a lot more safety regulation and a lot more qualified labor on those jobs.
Chris?
Could you ask me the question again? I'm sorry.
The question is, would you support increased health and safety regulations for pipe development in Middletown?
Well, I wouldn't say just Middletown. This is an issue that's statewide. This is something that, the first thing that I did when I went to Harrisburg was to bring the Middletown Coalition and other groups, including the Superintendent of Rosary Media School Board, to Harrisburg to sit down in front of one of our subcommittees in order to testify so that we could get all of the safety requirements and information out. When we're looking at safety requirements, I've worked in a bipartisan way, back and forth across the aisle, trying to come up with safety advocacy groups, or I should say safety policy group in the state, at the state level. We have to figure out how to keep all of our communities safe from these pipelines. We need siting authority. This is something we could turn this entire hour into, just talking about pipelines.
The next question, Chris, this is your first. What's the solution for helping Pennsylvanians get access and then actually use affordable, quality healthcare services that they need? In other words, please specifically address how many people can overcome the dual challenges they face of healthcare coverage and use. Want me to read it again?
No, I'm good. So healthcare is an issue that everyone deserves quality and affordable access to healthcare. This is an issue that it's a mechanism of how do you get there. When I look at healthcare, it's a dollars and cents issue. We have to go back and figure out how we can provide affordable healthcare to people. For instance, when you look at this, it's a matter of, we have bills right now to provide telemedicine to people, to try to get more nurse practitioners involved, to look at our local healthcare organizations, our community centers. We have to figure out how to provide this. It's not an option. It's something that we must do as a community.
Kristin?
So when I worked in New Mexico, I was very proud to be part of the one-year lead up to the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, where the work that we did enabled 300,000 new people to get health insurance, again, in one of the poorest states in the country. This did not bankrupt our state. In fact, it saved our state so much money in all of the indigent care that people were having to cover with their taxes when people showed up to emergency rooms without health care. We were able not only to save those costs from emergency medicine in multiple nonprofit hospitals that didn't have the budgets to handle that burden often, but we were also able to bring more federal dollars to our state to provide that health coverage for 300,000 new people. So I think there are policy solutions. It just requires political will and hard work.
The next question, Kristin, you first. How do you plan on correcting the problems with state financing for Pennsylvania state and public pension plans?
So I think that we're all, especially those of us connected to school districts in any way, shape, or form, familiar with the ways that PSERS has been a burden on already strained school budgets that have few revenue sources. We have a state that took a little bit of a gamble a few years back when those retirement funds were increasing and doing well with some strong investments, and then 2007 happened and the bubble burst, and we hit a huge, huge issue. We've put that burden on taxpayers and school districts to shoulder, as well as public sector employees. And so I think that being judicious and careful about how we're investing in state pensions and making sure that we're making safe, long-term bets instead of taking gambles when the market looks good is one way that we can protect taxpayers from having this burden.
Chris?
So we dealt with this issue this year in Harrisburg, and what we looked at are new employees coming into the state. This is a situation where you're looking at defined benefit versus defined contribution. And we tried to look at this from the standpoint of new employees coming in. And new employees are now going to be on a defined contribution, at least partially. It's a hybrid model, so that they're going to have partial pension, and then it's going to be a partial defined contribution. You have to look at this thing. The taxpayers of Pennsylvania, we don't have an unlimited amount of money. And how do we make this fair for everyone? Most of the people in this room, I'm sure, are on a 401k style program. And that's what we're going to try to do with our state.
Okay, Chris, question number 4. In your opinion, what defines the American dream?
For me, the American dream comes down to opportunity. It's literally, we have an opportunity, all of our kids, and we need to figure out, and when I say all of our kids, in our area, we live in a very wealthy, blessed area. Most of our kids that are graduating from our high schools have the opportunity to go on to college or tech school or other things. When I look at opportunity, I want to make sure that we can roll that out across the board so that people in the lower income areas like Philadelphia and Chester, beyond what we have locally, can afford the American dream. It's literally a life-sustaining wage for everyone. But you have to earn that. You have to reach out, and you have to seize that opportunity.
Kristin?
I think that the American dream is for us to all be able to live in a collaborative and peaceful community where we know our neighbors and work together for the greater good. I think that Chris is right, that equity and opportunity are huge parts of the American experiment, and that there are many people that have come to this country with nothing and built not just something, but built empires. And so I think that we have work to do on that dream, and that there are ways that we can create more equity and more paths to opportunity for everyone in our communities. We used to do it when I was a child in the 70s, and everyone that lived in my community was able to get a really solid public education, and I think that's where it starts. We need equitable opportunity, multiple paths to graduation, multiple paths to careers afterwards, and education that provides for 21st century careers so that we've all got a shot after high school.
Question number 5, Kristin. What measures would you support to maximize voter turnout by encouraging the greatest number of voters to actually vote in elections regardless of political affiliation, such as early voting, open primaries, absentee ballots without first requiring submission of affidavits, same-day voting, and/or electronic voting?
I think that the state has a long way to go in voter modernization. There are many, many different states that have adopted mail-in balloting, early voting. These are not just solutions that are more inclusive to allow more people to participate in voting, but they're also cost-effective. If you think about what it takes statewide in a state our size to operate polling places on one day, every person in this room, regardless of party that's a committee person, knows what it's like to staff these polling places and how hard it can be sometimes. When you have access to voting like early voting, mail-in ballots, and other voter modernization bills that have passed in your state, you're saving the taxpayers money, as well as opening up the opportunity for people who do shift work, or people who care for a relative, or other folks that might not have access in that 12 or 13-hour window on one day to participate in the process.
Chris?
Well, I think the most important thing is the sanctity of the ballot box. One person, one vote. I think that we've moved forward with voter registration from the standpoint of allowing everyone to register online and even at the DMV at this point. But one area where I see that we can improve is with the absentee ballot process. I think that we should move that specific process to online so you don't have to send multiple pieces of paper back and forth. And I also think it's a matter of, I would move it to a no excuse. You don't have to be simply being out of the state or out of the area or sick. Just simply a no excuse absentee ballot.
The next question is for you, Chris. Do you support an independent citizen commission rather than allowing Pennsylvania's General Assembly or political parties to draw legislative districts that allow voters to select their elected representatives rather than the reverse?
So I supported fair districts. And when you look at fair districts and the organization itself, it really came out of Maryland and Massachusetts. So Maryland only sends one Republican to Washington. Massachusetts doesn't send any Republicans to Washington. When I look at our specific area, we need to come up with a better way of doing this. And the reason I say that, if you look at the 7th Congressional District, Pat Meehan's former district, the Mickey kicking Goofy, whatever you wanted to call it, it was an ugly district on paper to look at the picture, but you know, it was only still an R+2 district. Now, with the new change that they made, it's become a D+15 district. So essentially what that's done, it's taken at least all the Republican votes in this room out of the equation. So it's going to come down to the point where where our votes mean nothing. And then from the Democratic standpoint, it pushes those candidates to the left. They play to the base of their party as opposed to being part of a more moderate district. And I think that's the biggest problem that we see in our country today, is simply the fact that we're not more moderate. We're not going to the center. We're going to the extremes. How do we pull our country back together? And right now what we have isn't there. I'm sorry.
Kristin?
I'm a firm believer in an independent commission. I believe that commission should be made up of experts, elected judiciary, as well as citizens. I think that we have precedent for this in many other states, and specifically, we have mathematic, scientific, algorithmic precedents for this. There's a high court, a national federal high court ruling that decided that there is actually a prescribed mathematic process that makes this fair. And so I don't see any reason why we couldn't take a fair process from higher judiciary and apply that here in Pennsylvania, so that what my opponent has said is true, that this is a fair application of a science-based, math-based application of, drawing of boundaries by experts and with citizen input in a commission.
Question number 7, Kristin. Pennsylvania currently ranks 45th out of 50 states in funding public schools by providing only 38% of a school district's revenue. What would you do to ensure public schools receive fair and adequate state funding to enable Pennsylvania's General Assembly to meet its constitutional obligation to, quote, provide for the maintenance and support of a thorough and efficient system of public education, end quote, for all students?
So I think there's a prescriptive two-part solution here. One is adequate funding and one is fair funding. We are at an historic low in the amount of public education funding in this state. When I talked about the 70s being a great time for public education when I was growing up, that's when we had our peak funding of public education in Pennsylvania. And so we've done it before. I don't see why we cannot increase the amount of funding for public education that we're required to provide in this state and pull some of that strain off of the taxpayer. We've also narrowed the number of revenue streams down to only 2. We take this money to fund our schools from the taxpayers, either in the form of property tax or per capita taxes. There are a few other revenue streams. And the funding that we get from the feds in order to be able to keep up with the special needs children in our districts is not adequate and is not keeping pace with the rising costs in that specific area across the state. So I think that we need to look to our state legislature to be responsible to fairly and adequately fund schools.
Chris?
All right, so this year alone, we increased education funding for K through 12 by over $100 million. Last year, we increased the funding by over $100 million. When I listen to the governor, and he talks about it, we've increased funding for public education in general by $1 billion. So we are putting money into education. A lot of this locally comes from our property taxes. But one of the things that we have to do is we have to fully implement the fair funding formula that we have. That's something that most of the Republican legislators in Harrisburg are pushing for, and we're pushing the governor to do it. When I look at education funding at this point in time, we're literally looking at the biggest problem is hold harmless. We have districts inside of Pennsylvania that 79% of their funding comes from the state. I don't consider that currently a fair funding model. So we do need to go back, eliminate hold harmless. But those are the kids that we're educating. These kids are the ones that are going to take jobs and fill all of our positions. So I'm getting my red card. Anyway, yes, we have to go back and look at funding for how we're going to deal with our schools.
Question number 8, Chris. Several states are experimenting with different ways to administer Medicaid, such as new work requirements, etc. Are there any changes you would like to see in how Pennsylvania administers Medicaid?
Sure you don't want to go first on this one? Now, when I look at how we're administering it's a cost-driven program. The bottom line is we have to figure out how to take care of all of our citizenry. How I'm looking at medicine personally is I'm trying to look at even the telemedicine aspects of things. It's bills that we're trying to push forward and simply giving people, especially in our more rural areas, access to quality health care. I'm not looking at major changes in the system. I'm looking at how do we reduce those costs.
Kristin?
So, as I mentioned before, I did a lot of work around the Affordable Care Act in New Mexico. I worked with the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and something to understand at a fundamental level in this country is that when you talk about Medicaid or Medicare, the majority of people that you are talking about are women, and the majority of people that use that service are children and elderly people, to start with. There are a lot of vulnerable populations that are accessing Medicaid and Medicare. So putting any kind of restrictions on access to Medicaid or Medicare is harming some of the most vulnerable people in our community at a time when they're in need. There's also statistics from Medicaid and Medicare services that demonstrate that the majority of users of Medicaid or Medicare are only on it, especially Medicaid, for 18 months or less. This is a security net that helps people when they're in a tough time between jobs or being a caregiver for a family member or some other crisis that requires them to seek help. The majority of people on Medicaid don't stay on Medicaid for years at a time. And I'd like to add, too, that federally speaking, we find money when we have a crisis and need to intervene in war. We find money when we need all sorts of things. Why not money to help people briefly through a crisis?
Question number 9, Kristin. What are your top 3 issues you want to address when elected?
Obviously, in this district, what's first and foremost from all of the constituents that I've talked to during both my school board race and this race is the Mariner East 2 pipeline, making sure that we are protecting families in this community whose only asset that they've been able to build over a lifetime of hard work is their home, making sure that their municipalities can enforce their zoning laws and their rights so that they can protect the private property they've worked so hard to attain. We need to make sure that our campuses like Elwyn, where there's developmentally disabled adults, our senior communities and our schools are safe from a potential hazardous accident. So Mariner East 2 is my #1 consideration at the behest of everyone I've talked to in this community over the last 2 years. My second largest concern, again, is adequate and fair funding of education in this state. I think that's our gift and our richness in this community, is the beautiful public education that we provide for citizens in this district and everyone's access to that across our county, regardless of living in a community as great as ours. Healthcare is my third, absolutely.
Chris?
Well, education. I mean, when you're looking at education, it's the #1 priority because that leads into jobs. And it's preparing our students and the people to come in and take over jobs, which helps business, which helps our economy expand. But then you look at taxes. We're all overburdened. The #1 thing that I hear from senior groups is they want to figure out how do we eliminate property taxes. Why am I so overburdened with what I'm paying? Now, it's a tough conversation to have when you talk about Senate Bill 76 with so many people. But I want to skip to my third issue, which is the environment. And I have a 98 rating by the environmental groups here in Pennsylvania on my scorecard. I've been very focused on this. I've been very focused on the Mariner East since originally going to Harrisburg. There's not a day that goes by that I don't work on something having to do with that issue and trying to figure out. And I've been quoted in the paper multiple times as far as dealing with this. One other thing, as far as even my opponent's employer, the Keystone Energy Efficiency Alliance, just praised my work just in the last couple of weeks for legislation that I'm putting out in order to reduce the cost of energy to the consumer.
Chris, question number 10. What can be done to cut down on the extreme hate-filled political partisanship, tribalism?
Well, a piece of legislation that I've introduced in Harrisburg is focused specifically on this issue. We have to figure out how to get the independent moderates re-engaged in our process. They've walked away from all of us because they've had enough of all the bickering and squabbling and the problems. How do we get them re-engaged? Because if we can get the independents to start voting again, and that's what the legislation is specifically dealing with, then we can pull both of our parties back to the middle. And that's the only way we're going to deal with this, if we come back to the middle from the extremes.
Kristin?
So I find that all of us in this community have common ground, and I found that in my legislative work as well. You can look at the Rose Tree Media School Board, where we've got 5 Republicans and 4 Democrats, and I feel like we all have a very collegial and cooperative working relationship, and that's reflective of most of my career. When I worked on policy in New Mexico, all of the stuff that we passed was bipartisan because there was a Republican majority. Here in Pennsylvania, as he mentioned, the organization that I work for passes most of our legislation in this state legislature with the sponsorship and co-sponsorship of conservatives. And it's because we found common ground and things that we can agree on. I represent job creators from across the state that are responsible for 85,000 jobs in every county in this state that are not outsourceable, and the majority of those are good living wage construction jobs. That's something we can agree on, and that's a starting point, and it's helped us build relationships across the aisle. And you know, we probably couldn't be more different politically, but he's happy to sponsor the legislation that my organization writes and supports. And that's because we've found something that's important to all of us, which is making sure that we can grow good jobs in this state that don't leave the state and grow our economy. So I think that we can be less partisan when we can really work to find common ground.
Kristin, question number 11. Now, this might take 2 readings. No, please ask if you want it twice. There's a caption. PA House Bill 505. Anti-Hate Crimes Bill. Would you be willing to co-sponsor, ask that it be put on the floor for a vote, and vote yes on House Bill 505, which amends the bill to include, quote, ancestry, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity to the PA Hate Crimes Bill, which currently includes race, color, religion, national origin. Why or why not?
I would be happy to support this amendment to that bill, and I'll just add the caveat that I would want to read the bill language before co-sponsoring it, but obviously have a willingness. My family is not your average family, and there are all sorts of different folks that have married into our family or are part of our family. So for me personally, as someone who is Jewish, as someone who is LGBTQ, as someone who has folks in my family of origin that are not Caucasian, as people, you know, as someone who has people in their life, in the community, that have actually suffered hate crimes, and I don't mean in the community I grew up in Baltimore, I mean in Media Borough. I have a very good friend that suffered a serious hate crime that was gay bashing and ended up in the hospital for weeks. I think that we haven't done enough to protect what are already federally protected classes in the state of Pennsylvania, and I'm willing to make sure that anyone that feels that they are downtrodden and don't have protection under our law has a voice.
Chris?
Well, I have to go back and read the bill, but based on what I hear, I can tell you what I am in support of, and I've co-sponsored, which is House Bill 1410. And House Bill 1410 is a non-discrimination bill, and it protects individuals based on their sexual orientation and other things, from housing, work, and other things. I would probably support House Bill 105, but I need to go back and read it first. So I prefer to talk about what I already have supported.
Question number 12, Chris. If the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade and abortion regulation reverts to the state, what legislation would you propose for Pennsylvania?
Well, first, I am pro-life. And I think I'd prefer to look at this from the standpoint of what legislation I've supported this session. And what we supported this session was literally looking at currently dismemberment abortions are allowed at 6 months. That's where babies are literally ripped apart, where they're targeted specific body parts inside of the womb, and they're going after. So we tried to roll that back to 5 months. And I think that that's something that's reasonable. A workaround on that issue is literally just putting the baby to sleep, injecting some saline, and then you're not ripping apart a live baby. Beyond that, we tried to add some protections for babies with Down syndrome. And I think that both of those two are reasonable bills. I struggle with this issue because I look at babies, I don't look at them as fetuses, I see them as babies. So I am pro-life.
No clap, please.
Excuse me?
Ma'am, it's one of the rules of the forum. It was the second time.
Well, I don't think she needs to be assaulted by a member of the audience.
So the audience will leave it to me from now on. Thank you. Kristin, question number 12.
Thank you. I am a firm believer that every woman in this room knows her own mind, knows her own body, and is bright enough to have agency and make decisions about her own medical care. It is my firm belief that every woman in this room should and does have the right to make decisions about her body, her family, and her children. She's also responsible for her own family planning. I will do whatever I can to support a woman's right to have a voice in decisions about her own body and her agency over her family and their priorities. I'm a person of faith, but I don't find it necessary to impose my faith on others, and my faith does not require that I make medical demands of anyone else. We have a federal right to make these decisions for ourselves, and I will always uphold any woman's right to choose life, to not choose life, and to make her own decisions about her own body and her own family.
Question number 13. Did I hear anything? Question number 13. If elected, what will you do to support the environment in the absence of federal action? Kristin?
This is my profession. I work professionally in an industry that works really, really hard in a smart policy way to impact our natural environment. In Pennsylvania, we're really fortunate to have a constitutional provision that protects our natural environment and guarantees us clean water, clean air, and a right to enjoy that natural environment. So unfortunately, there are businesses in neighbor states and our own that have violated those rights, and we've had a war of attrition on our Department of Environmental Protection that has made it so that we've got very little out there to stop industrial manufacturers and others that would pollute our environment and have. So what we do is we work on a solution that we know impacts the carbon load of this state and saves electric ratepayers money at the same time while growing jobs across our state. And I think that's where we need to be looking to protect our environment. Let's find ways that create equity and jobs in our community, that benefit everyone across the state and lower your bills for electricity or natural utilities at the same time that we're protecting the great resources that we have in this state.
Chris?
On this one, I agree with Kristin. I'm a Republican that stood on the stage with a state representative, Chris Rabb, and supported a bill trying to get to 100% renewable energy by 2025. This is something that I think we can all embrace. These are strategies that we need to implement, again, to save money. It saves us money, and if we can, I love the idea of taking a resource that we have as far as natural gas that's going to last 200 years and press that out to 1,000 years. Even though when we use natural gas, we are looking at approximately an 80% reduction in other fossil fuels in the way of pollutants. So Kristin and I are in agreement.
Question number 14, Chris. Do you support a free market economy and private ownership of businesses?
Yes. The free market is what has given us so many great blessings in this country. It's what's made us the envy of the world. When I look at the free market and the free exchange of ideas and businesses that win and businesses that fail, and whether you want to have vanilla ice cream or fudge ripple ice cream, we have so many products and so many gifts in this country because of the free market system. So, yes.
Kristin?
I'm someone that is an entrepreneur that has owned both for-profit and nonprofit businesses and started those from the ground up. I'm somebody that works for a trade organization of over 50 member businesses in the energy efficiency industry, and we represent them making a jobs and economic argument in an industry that has grown by 7% year over year since 2008. I am a pro-jobs, pro-economy, pro-business candidate, and live that every day in my full-time work.
Kristin, when elected, this is question number 15, do you have any ideas on how to improve school safety? Our students are our future.
I have a number of ideas, and they aren't just mine. My philosophy about being a public servant is servant leadership, which means my constituency informs the work that I do. So earlier this year on the Rose Tree Media School Board, when a group of over 700 parents and students approached our board asking us to put together a resolution on gun safety in our schools, our entire board got to work listening to those parents, listening to those students, and trying to make sure that we were meeting the needs that they were expressing for what they wanted from our school district. I think that the entire school board has also worked together on the issues of safety around the Mariner East 2 pipeline, and I think that this is a shining example of the ways that you can listen to your constituency and do the will of the people. Regardless of what our personal positions might be, we are called as public servants to do the will of the community that we serve, and so I want for you to know that where we differ in opinion, if you come to me and you want me to listen to what it is that you need, and that is the will of the majority of this district, we'll do the work that you send us to do. It's our job to serve you.
Each school district needs its own solution. I'm not going to pretend to say that what works here in Rose Tree Media is going to work in Center County, Pennsylvania. We need to go back and do a thorough look at each one of the school districts. We just approved $60 million to go back and do that to try to make schools safer. You know, one thing I do want to mention is that my opponent just voted against bringing a drug dog in through the schools, simply to go through and try to make our schools safer. Part of safety to me is keeping drugs out of our schools and trying to deal with this opioid crisis that we have. I mean, that's the #1 thing that's killing people. I think we lost 72,000, a little more than 72,000 people last year to drug overdoses. And that's a huge issue. And just in comparison, when you think about it from this standpoint, in the Vietnam War, we only lost 58,000 troops. 58,000 troops in the Vietnam War. Just in 2017, we lost 72,000 kids.
The final question. How about if you have a response, could you please address it in the closing?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
No, let her.
Can't do that? All right.
I just wanted to add that this issue of the drug sniffing dogs came before our school board recently, and it has been the will of every parent that came to us that we put this up for another vote. So another vote is forthcoming, and all of us will be taking into advisement all of the concerns that parents have expressed to us. I'm absolutely certain when we vote. Thanks.
Chris, the last question. When elected, what will you do to improve ethics and transparency in our state government?
Good luck. You know, when I look at Harrisburg, it's a crazy place. I've been up there for 2 years. I don't see a ton of unethical behavior happening, but it's just a cluster of problems. I think that most people in Harrisburg are good people, but they do run into issues just like in every business that you're looking at. My wife works in HR, so constantly around our kitchen table, we have side conversations. We're talking about it. It's not a perfect system. It's far from a perfect system. But I think that good people coming together and trying to work is all we can hope for.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. When elected, what will you do to improve ethics and transparency in our state government?
So I think there are a number of solutions to this. One of the issues that we've had most recently over the last year that I think has been really revealed to the public in our news cycle is the ways that the caucuses in the House and Senate in our state government regulate all of the HR of their own party. I find this to be strange, having worked in other state legislatures, and I don't think that it necessarily lends itself to transparency or, you know, a high standard of ethics. And I'll claim that in my own party, we still abide folks that have some accusations that have not been dealt with. We found someone in our party to have made massive payouts in sexual harassment that was governed by our caucus. And so I don't think that this needs to fall to any one legislator to go to their own caucus and demand transparency and an ethical standard. I think that that sort of thing should be regulated by someone independent of both of those parties that's got relevant, like your wife, HR experience, professional people that know how to handle human resources issues, and that provide a place for someone from either party to go as a whistleblower or someone with concerns.
There's two more questions. Question 17. Everyone knows of the rise in drugs with young people. What is your stance on drug prevention programs in high school? First, Kristin.
Sure. So we have a number of highly effective evidence-based programs that are operating right now in the Rose Tree Media School District that have efficacy, and I think that we could use more. We hear pretty regularly from both parents and teachers that our schools could use more guidance counselors, that we could use more mental health services in order to be able to meet the needs of students that are in crisis. But there's also a lot of research about early intervention that we could be doing. We could be expanding policies that happened during the K-5 era, where we've shown effective interventions in opioid addiction by providing certain kind of supports to students in that K-5 lifespan. So it's important for us to roll back even a little bit before high school to make sure that all of those kids in K-5 feel like there's a strong adult in their life that cares about them, and that there are resources for them to go to during the school day. And then through adequate funding of our school services, we could be providing a lot more to high school students so that they don't turn to drugs in the first place.
Chris?
I agree with Kristin. I already mentioned that this is a tragic problem that doesn't have any economic boundaries. We're looking at this. I mean, I stood on the steps of the Delaware County Courthouse along with a number of other legislators trying to put through a bill about certified recovery specialists after someone overdoses. But I agree with Kristin, we have to go back and look at the younger kids. I mean, if you look at a child, by the time they're in 3rd grade, if they're up to an adequate reading level, if they're up to an adequate math level, the chances of that they're going to get into a lot of problems are dramatically reduced. So going back and looking at programs like Pre-K for PA and going back and trying to figure out how to help these kids, I'm not an educator. I can only go by what I've learned from the educators that I've interviewed and met with. But more has to be done.
Chris, I think this might be the final question. What are the issues and potential legislation on immigration at the state level? Which do you prioritize more protection of? Borders or protection of DACA recipients and families?
Has to be neither or. Okay. Listen, most of the people that are coming and staying in our country illegally aren't coming over the borders. They're flying in, they're coming in various ways, and they're simply overstaying their visas. But we still have to secure our borders, and it goes back to the drug problem. We have to go back and look at, and I am not in favor of sanctuary cities. I'm against sanctuary cities. But it's more from a standpoint of dealing with the drug problems and the criminal aspects of it. For instance, just within the last 6 months, in Philadelphia, there was a gentleman who was released without calling ICE, and he ended up going back and raping a 5-year-old little girl. And we just can't have that. It was someone that shouldn't have been in the country. I'm all in favor of coming up with a system to bring people into this country legally. We actually need them. The economy is going so well right now, we have to come up with a system of bringing people into the country to fill some of our jobs, especially with all of our retirees leaving the workforce. And it helps with tax money too.
Kristin?
So these folks are here. They're in your community, they're members of your community, and they bring their families with them in your community. We have plenty of people living in our communities that are workers in this country that pay the same taxes that you pay every day. They pay the gas tax that supports our highways. They're paying sales tax when they purchase things. These are folks that are contributing to our communities and folks that deserve health and safety just like every other member of this community so that they don't compromise ours. In our area, the majority of people here without documentation are people that work on farms that are nearby, especially the mushroom farms that are close to us. I work with a dairy farmer that's done major energy efficiency projects that went and met with President Trump about the importance of protecting folks that are called illegal in this country because his farm needs for them to be able to come and work. And business owners like that, one of the largest dairy owners in our state, that need workers, that can't find folks to do those jobs, that have productive citizens that help grow their business in this state, there has to be a path for those folks to come here and work and support and grow those businesses, but also to remain safe and remain healthy while they are members of our community. That protects our public safety and our health.
Okay. Now we'll do closing statements for 1.5 minutes. Kristin, you're first, and 1.5 minutes each. Kristin?
I'm proud to be here with all of you. I recognize a lot of faces in the room on both sides of the aisle, and I think that this is a shining moment. If you see how full this room is, and how different there's, you all know each other, you've known each other for years. How many people there are in this room that probably don't agree with one another, but that are all part of the same community. I think that this speaks volumes for both candidates here, and I want to see more of this. So I appreciate all of you making time like this on your Sunday afternoon to come out, participate in democracy, and be a part of this community, whether or not we all agree with each other. I think that this is exemplary of the kind of community that we can be and need to be moving on into the future. I believe that I bring some unique and important qualifications to a role like this, and I would be honored to serve my community in this way. I hope that you'll give some consideration to choosing a candidate that represents maybe different values than yours, but also a really strong work ethic and a body of policy experience that is pretty deep. I'm here to serve. I'll be continuing to serve this community no matter what happens on November 6th. But again, it's my honor to be the nominee for my party. And more important than anything else, I hope you'll all vote on November 6th. Thank you so much for your time.
Chris?
First, I agree with Kristin again. I want to get everyone out to vote November 6th, and for either candidate. I think it's very hard to get to know the two of us in the course of an hour with some very specific questions. So what I'd simply like to take my time in doing is let you know the people that have interviewed me for hours and talked through different things with me. For instance, I have a 92% on my environmental scorecard, something that Republicans typically don't get. From the standpoint, I've been endorsed by Delco United for sensible gun policy. Again, it's something Republicans typically don't get. I've been endorsed by the Humane Society of Pennsylvania. I've also been endorsed by the PA teachers, the PSEA, and I've also been endorsed by the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce, so it kind of cuts across the board. Anyway, with that said, I just want to thank everyone for coming out, for listening, for taking an interest, and again, please vote November 6th. Thank you.